No, it's Gladstone.
So hello everyone, I'm going to take the slide down in a minute. Usually when we start the sessions, for those of you I haven't met, my name is Renata Fermi, and we like to call this our virtual learning experience as at the Chester Library. One, because we have floral design, we have crafts, we have a different varied programs that we're offering online for our patrons during this unique time. So certainly if you have any suggestions, some of you, are very familiar with the library, we'd love to get any feedback. And in particular, we're really excited to have an author talk for this month. Before we begin with our guest author, just really quickly, I think a few of you may be aware, but we are accepting items and all items are renewed and fines are waived until July 31st. You do not have any fines even for digital products. So just want to make sure that you're aware of that. And we certainly have new content coming in magazines, top books as well. This is also a Zoom. I know many of you know each other, but based on some past experience with Zoom, I thought it was very useful to have this. That certainly, it seems like you'll all be fine to be respectful with everyone's opinions and ideas. I do ask while Charlie is speaking, if you can keep your audio on mute, that way we can have a chance to hear him and his great presentation. Another thing, you'd be surprised at what you can see on video with Zoom. A lot of people don't realize that they're on Zoom at the time. So please be mindful of that. And also I am recording the session for our Chester Library archive. So I do recommend people, and it has happened a few times, to not ask the author any personal information about anything too specific, and as well as give your own information. So we just really want to be very careful with that. Otherwise, I can't share the video if the information gets too much, because unfortunately we've had that happen. So again, before we begin, all thoughts, comments, and opinions from this speaker or attendees, they're strictly your own. They're not endorsed, supported, or the views of the Chester Library. We're not responsible for any purchases or services made by the patron back and forth between the speaker, but you're more than welcome. I'm sure many of you are going to purchase Charlie's amazing book. Again, this is recorded. Any questions or concerns, you can always reach us at contact@chesterlibrary.org with that. And our programs are available due to the very generous support of the Friends of the Chester Library. Very soon on I believe it's July 24th and 25th, they'll be having their pop-up book sale. They are taking, I believe they're still taking donations. And again, my name is Renata Fermi. I manage adult programs and library communications. So with that, I'm going to stop the share so you can all see each other.
Oh, that's nice.
See? And then I'm going to stop my video. And what I'm going to do is Charlie, I forgot to do my intro slide, but you're so popular. I had an intro slide on you actually in your books. I apologize. But instead of sharing, I'm going to turn it over to you if you don't mind.
No, that's perfectly fine. And
okay, so I'm going to stop my video, but for everyone, I will be on. And if you can, I may mute you, but you can always unmute yourself. It's just to limit background noise. I know Steve said he's waiting for AAA, so just for things like that.
Yeah, and Pete, no obscene gestures, Pete, or she can't use the video.
Oh, shucks.
Well, thank you for joining this session this afternoon. I'm very excited to have some time to talk to friends and readers and people I've never met before. I'll tell you a little funny story to start off, and I'll also say that there is a chat button at the bottom of your screen, and if you have any questions, just type them in the chat as we go, and either Danella or I will call them out at some point and try and answer as many of your questions as we can. So here's the funny story. Ian Fraser was and is a very well-known author at the New Yorker magazine, and he had written a book and was going to have an event like this, but live. And they publicized it, and it was at a nice public venue. And nobody showed up. So he, he's looking at his watch, he's trying to figure out what to do. And then 3 men walk in and sit in the front row. So he thinks, great, I have, it's at least it's 3 people. I'll give my presentation. So he begins to talk. And 2 minutes later, the police come in and arrest the 3 men. They had just robbed the bank next door. So I thought it was a funny story. And when I gave my first book event at the Clinton bookstore a few years ago, I wish the bookstore was still here. It's not anymore. And Steve, who's on the call, came down to visit. I planned to tell that particular story that night in front of a crowd because we had advertised and it's a very popular bookstore and nobody came. So I am very thankful to have you here tonight or this afternoon. So I don't have to be Ian Fraser today. Just if you could raise your hand, how many of you have read any of my books? Anybody there? Oh, a bunch of people. Great. And if you haven't, I'll tell you later how you might get them if you like. I think, Danila, you have a few questions. So why don't you share some of the questions you have? And if not, I'll just go on to something else.
Hey everyone, I know you can't see me, but you can hear me. So just have a few questions. Thanks for submitting those in. So one question I think we can start with is, Charlie, if you can talk about what type of research do you do for your stories?
Oh, well, that's kind of a fun part of writing is research. And for my first book, Not So Dead, my books are what they might call techno thrillers. That is, the plots are thrillers, but there's a smattering of current technology in them, and it's technology that is real today, but most people don't know about. So everything in Not So Dead was real, including things like the duo skin tattoo, which is a tattoo that is electronic, and you can, by rubbing your tattoo, get your computer to do various things. This is real. The one thing that is in development in my first book is the concept, and the thing that hooked me on writing this book was I had read an article some years ago that Google and Facebook and Amazon were in fact investing billions of dollars in the ability to upload your brain, your memories, and other things online to the cloud so that they could live there forever. And when I read that, I said, wow, what could go wrong with that? And that was sort of the spark that started the story. So for Not So Dead, to get back to the research question, I knew a lot, and Google is my friend. So if I didn't know something, I could look it up right away. For example, there are, unfortunately, a number of people get killed in my books. And frequently guns are involved, and I'm not a gun expert, but I know my readers who know about guns are very particular. So I learned a lot about guns just online. For my second book, Not So Gone, I decided I really wanted to do some in-person research. So I had a session with a karate expert who taught me all about karate. I spent an afternoon with a chemical weapons expert. And probably the most interesting thing was that I have 2 friends in Boston. Steve knows them, Fran and Bob Arnold. They're a psychiatrist and a psychologist, and I interviewed them concerning multiple personality disorder, because that is a theme in the book. Sherry, you know about that, and Julie, right? And I asked them, I said, how many cases of multiple personality disorder do you deal with? And they said lots, which surprised me. And then Bob proceeded to tell me the story as far as he could without breaching confidentiality about one of his patients who had like 7 different personalities. And he had been treating her for a while. I found out later that because she made it public, he was treating her for 20 years. And at the end of the 20 years and dealing with multiple traumas, which is what causes multiple personality disorder, she had a meeting with her 7 personalities. And she got them together and she said, thank you for helping me through all of these rough times. And you can go now. I'm better. And they left. And that was it. And when I heard that story, I thought that was so poignant that it somehow managed to get woven into Not So Gone. And then for the latest book, which just came out a couple of days ago, called Not So Done, maybe my most interesting day was I spent a day with 3 or 4 top people at the ATF, the Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms Agency, one of whom was a sniper. And she's a sniper and she teaches the other snipers. Now, this is one of the tough asses women I've ever met. She was very cool. And so I got a chance to talk to her at length about it, and I learned a lot, and some of that made it into the book. For example, there is a sniper in the book, and when she's captured, she's asked what her job is, and she says, I am a forward observer. Now, you wouldn't know this otherwise, but in ATF lingo, that means she's the person that kills people. So little things like that. So it's fun to research these things and talk to new people and get to learn about them and then weave them into the story with some interesting characters and personalities. So that's research in a nutshell. I've already started the next book, and it's going in a very different direction. And I found too, I think it was Ann Patchett that I heard speak about research, and she says she writes her books, does no research, and just leaves blanks where she doesn't know something, and then she goes back and fills it in. Well, I do a little bit of both. I research up front, I fill in the blanks as I go, and then I may have to go out after and get some more information. For example, in Not So Dead, a lot of this active scenes take place in the streets of Cambridge, Massachusetts. So Amy and I went up for a weekend to Cambridge, Massachusetts, and although Google Street View was terrific and helpful, we went down those streets to see if it had the type of houses I described in the book. Hopefully for this next book, we'll be going to Paris to do a little absolutely necessary research. Yes. Also in Not So Gone, another research trip was our DHS and FBI agents, Rich Little and Michelle Hadar, are in Brooklyn. And I thought, while they're in Brooklyn, they should go to my absolute favorite pizza place in Brooklyn, which is called Paulie G's in Greenpoint. happen to know Paulie G, and it's a whole other story. So we got a bunch of friends together, and we said, who wants to go on a research mission to Paulie G's? And we all loaded in the car and went to Paulie G's and had a great time. And I got the menu because in chapter 11 of Not So Gone, it's titled Paulie G's. And the ricotta and brisket pizza are described as part of the story. So it really was legitimate. Oh, good question. I'm seeing a couple of questions come up, so I kind of like to answer those. First one was, do you want each book to stand on its own, or are you trying to build a body of work with connections between each book? And the short answer to that is yes, both. I'd like it if people who've not read my books can pick up the latest book, Not So Done, and it stands alone and they can read it. But there's references back. And if you haven't read any of the books, I would start with Not So Dead. Because it does build on the story. So I wrote them as part of a standalone series. In fact, I'll show you, just if I get my screen share back. Let's get it back here. On Amazon, there's 3 in the series, and this is Not So Dead. And I did something special for this group because if you haven't read any of my books, just for today, when we're done, if you have a Kindle e-reader, or you can read on the Kindle on your phone, you can get Not So Dead, the Kindle edition, for 99 cents. So that's quite a bargain just for today. I'll stop the screen sharing and come back. The second question was, what's the most difficult thing about writing characters from the opposite sex? And that's a really good question. It leads to kind of two questions for me. And that is, when I was writing the first book, the development of characters, both male and female, is sort of an interesting journey. And I'm gonna answer this in a couple of ways and get back to the opposite sex question. And that is, where do my characters come from and how do they get named? The character of Sam Sunborn, who is our main character, is a combination of sun and morn. So I meant it to be a very positive name, and it's also unique because you've probably never heard it before. So I like to try and pick unique names for major characters. And by the way, Sam Sunborn has his own Twitter account, just if you wanted to know. And then as I was writing Not So Dead, I realized that 70% of all fiction readers and fiction readers of thrillers are women. So it's important to have women in the book who are appealing, strong. I was brought up by a single mother. My father died when I was a year old, and my mother was awesome. So I had a role model of a woman who basically, when my father died at age 49, lost everything, had 3 small kids, wasn't working, had to go to work. And she was like, what am I going to do? And her dream was actually to become a stockbroker. This is in the 1950s. And she became the first female stockbroker in New Jersey. went on to become vice president of Thompson McKinnon. And so I had a role model for very strong, accomplished woman. And you didn't mess with my mother. So the women in my book tend to be pretty tough-ass women. And then I had one interesting character development that was in Not So Dead, maybe a few chapters in, there is a murder takes place, and a detective shows up whose name is Al Favor. Now, Al Favor started out as being a man, a Columbo-style man, and I decided Al Favor would be much more interesting if Al was a woman. So I changed her to a woman. And then I thought it'd be much more interesting if I didn't change her name from Al, let her have a man's name, and take it a step further and let her be gay. So she is a really interesting, multifaceted personality. I also spent some time with a best-selling woman thriller author who described how she writes about women as a woman. And I learned a number of sort of tips about things in describing women that were both feminine and politically correct and not offensive. And so it's interesting in this time to be writing in a way that is interesting, and a number of my characters are kind of snarky, and some of them are a little bit offensive, which makes them interesting. But what I will do is call them out. I'll have another character call them out on being politically incorrect or offensive. So usually it's a stumbling guy, Rich Little, who's a very good DHS agent, but is totally 1950s. And his partner, Michelle Hadar, has to straighten him out a lot. Would you go more into your main characters and what makes them tick? Were there scenes you ended up cutting you wish you could have kept? Describe them in the decision-making process. Ooh, that's a good question. That one might take a little more thought than I'm going to do here. I will tell you that I do cut scenes, but I cut them and I don't delete them. I put them in a bucket somewhere else because I might use them again sometime later. One interesting thing I learned, I study writing all the time, even though I'm writing and publishing books. And I was reading a great book on writing when I was doing my second book called Save the Cat. It was written by a accomplished screenwriter. And he said, if there isn't conflict in every scene, you should cut this scene out. This is in movies. But it was really thought-provoking, because if there isn't conflict, things aren't interesting. And then I began to see it in everything I was reading and watching. And I do watch a lot of movies and a lot of TV. I grew up that way, and it's part of my storytelling heritage. And my father owned a couple of movie theaters. So every Saturday morning from the age 6, I was at the movies. And if I have time, I'll tell you a couple more movie stories. But the conflict in every scene, and I wasn't just in thrillers. My wife, Amy, who's on the call, good to have Amy here. She used to really like the Gilmore Girls. And so I would watch it with her because I'm a good guy. And in every scene, it's the mother fighting with the daughter, she's fighting with the grandmother, they're fighting with the boyfriends and the would-be boyfriends. There's too much conflict in my mind. But so Blake Snyder, who wrote the book Save the Cat, said, if there's not conflict, cut the scene out. So I've cut out scenes that are maybe boring um, in favor of some arc. Also, I'm looking for either an emotional rise or an emotional fall in every scene. And if that isn't there, if the scene doesn't move the story, advance the story forward, yeah, out it comes. When I was writing Not So Dead, I actually was at like 60,000 words, and Steve Bennett, who is or was on the call, who's been a great advisor to me and a friend. And in fact, I dedicated this last book to Steve. He's been so helpful. He runs a company called Author Bytes, BYTES.com, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, that helps authors with publishing, marketing. Some of his authors are Alice Hoffman, I think Ann Patchett too, Alice Hoffman, Steve Barry, David Morrell. Steve has just been a great helper and advisor to me. He said, the Not So Dead, he looked at the 60,000 words and he says, oh, you know, your writing's a little too Spartan. You really have to make it bigger. So I did. But after I wrote the first book, the problem was making them smaller because I had no trouble writing 100 or 120,000 words. So it became a matter of cutting it down and making it smaller. Let me go to another question. What special challenges did you face making your story stand out from others in the genre? Your main character, Sam Sunborn, struggles with depression from time to time. Have you had personal experience with this? Yes. That Sam does have some characteristics of me. I can't deny it. He's not me, but he has some characteristics of me. And sometime around 12, 13 years ago, I was seriously depressed. I had struggled with a business, difficulties, and it's also hereditary in my family. I've had a couple of suicides in my family that close to me. I had a difficult few years, and it was actually wandering around the Barnes and Noble bookstore one day, which I love to do. I found a book that changed it for me. I needed a different focus. Now, it happened that book was a great thriller, but it was also a story about the World Series of Poker, and it was written by a Harper's writer who was an English professor who went to the World Series of Poker he went to research the murder of one of the Binion brothers, which he wrote about, and the history of poker, and I got hooked on poker. So I became an obsessive poker player. I've won many tournaments. I competed in the World Series of Poker. And actually, it was a book that got me out of my depression. And some medication too, and a little bit of therapy. But so when Sam gets depressed, it comes from a writer who knows what that is about. Another question was, how does your background in philosophy play into your work? It happens that I went to the University of Rochester. My plan, and plans change, and serendipity changes life, doesn't it? Right? I went with a plan to study physics. I was a math physics guy in high school, and it was advanced placement, and I went to the University of Rochester, and they gave me a test when I entered to figure out where they were going to place me. So I took this test in physics, and they placed me in junior year physics, and I thought, well, isn't that cool? I mean, I must be really smart. But after 3 weeks in the class, I was totally lost. I had no idea what was going on. And I said, I got to do something else. And I walked into a philosophy class and fell in love with it, probably because the professor was so engaging. Um, and in conjunction with that, they had a language requirement at the University of Rochester. And most of the language, French, Spanish, they taught in a computer lab. And I said, nah, that's not for me, even though I like computers. So I accidentally wandered into an ancient Greek class in my freshman year. There were 9 people there, and the professor said, you know, if 5-year-old ancient Greeks could learn Greek, you can too. And he hooked me. He was just great. So I took 4 years of ancient Greek and philosophy and read Plato in the original Greek. And philosophy has stuck with me. So in Not So Dead and all the books, there are a number of philosophical references and a number of moral dilemmas. Sort of going back to what makes characters interesting. About 2/3 of the way through writing Not So Dead, I came up with this character, Michelle Hadar, who is a graduate student at MIT, but she was on a visa from Syria. Her family's in Syria. Unbeknownst to her, she gets a job working for the arch villain, the leopard. She doesn't realize what she's gotten herself into. And at some point, she is confronted by DHS and has a decision to make, whether to protect her family back in Syria, which DHS says they will do, but they haven't done yet, or to help her new country, the US. And she makes an interesting decision. I won't spoil it for you. So I think it's more interesting when our characters have moral challenges. And also the Not So Dead title has to do obviously with consideration of death, and our heroes were able to upload their personalities to the cloud so they could live digitally forever. Well, what's the moral quandary with that? I mean, if you could live forever, would you do it? It's an interesting question that some of our characters face. And I think that probably that whole, maybe my obsession with life and death questions is not only philosophical, but because my father died young, it's hung over me in a way. And so in a way, immortality is a dream. And I mentioned Google and those entrepreneurs. There are actually, they call them longevity engineers. They believe, and there is a whole school that believes, that aging is curable, that it's not inevitable, that there's a gene, it's number 23, and if we can turn that gene off, we won't age. It doesn't mean we won't get in a car accident or wear out, but conceivably we don't have to age. And then in addition to the longevity engineers, there are the longevity entrepreneurs who are investing in all this technology to make themselves immortal. I mean, they already think of themselves as supermen right in Silicon Valley, so they want to live forever. So that whole subject intrigues me, as does Plato's concept of the forms and the non-material world and what all of that means. So there really are people working on this subject now. By the way, if somebody has a question and you want to unmute yourself and just speak, that's fine too, if it doesn't get too noisy. You might be tired of just hearing me talk.
Yeah, Charlie, I'm asking people in the chat, because you were so engaging, I'm asking them, do they have questions?
Sure, good. So interrupt me anytime if somebody wants to to talk or chat about these subjects.
Let me see if Pam has a question, because I think Pam was on her phone, so it can be tricky using Zoom on your phone. Pam, are you there? Pam, can you unmute yourself? Okay. If you have any questions, and let us know. And Eileen said not right now.
All
She
right.
has
Well,
some questions.
I have a couple of more here that I'm happy to answer. One person has asked me, is there any message in your stories? And in writing, I believe the first thing that you want to be able to do is entertain people. If you can't entertain and make it fun and exciting, people aren't going to read what you write. But then underneath, I like to have the characters do some soul searching and share a message that might be uplifting or interesting for people. So, for example, in Not So Dead, there is a point where Sam is on a boat. They're in the middle of the ocean chasing some people down. And I might even read you that passage if I can put my hands on it quickly enough. Let's see if I got it. Yeah. And you might, this is Not So Dead. You might find it interesting to hear a little bit. This chapter is 68. It's called The Takedown. The Takedown was moving full speed ahead, bouncing on the swells of the outer harbor, turning to port and heading out to sea. As I leaned on the rail, I could hear the mist bouncing off our hull and smell the salty seawater wafting up from below. I thought of something I read once about the 3 keys to happiness: someone to love, something to do, and something to look forward to. I had the first 2 covered. Monica is the love of my life, and right now I had more than I could handle to do. But the future seemed so uncertain, I didn't know what I had to look forward to. I'd battled hereditary depression for years, sought treatment, and up until a few days ago, the future seemed bright and promising. Frank and I were going to change the world forever, at least for humankind. Now my dark clouds were returning, much darker than the dark clouds overhead. My whole body shook with a chill, and I didn't think it was from the cold, misty air. Al, remember I talked to you about the character Al. Al stepped to the rail beside me. How are you, my friend? You're looking a little gray. You're probably used to this, chasing the bad guys, getting shot at, but I'm not. I'm feeling physically and mentally wiped out. Once the adrenaline wears off, you might as well toss me overboard. Well, I'm used to chasing bad guys, but never this bad or dangerous. We just moved to the advanced level of this video game. Yeah, is the game called Doom? Al hit me on the back. This is the time that we need to rally. What's that they say? It's not what happens in life that matters, but how you respond to it. I have found the greatest test of my mettle comes at the darkest times, and the rewards for overcoming them are the greatest. So buck up, nerd. So there's an example of where, in the context of they're in the middle of a chase and action and all this, they take some time to reflect on, what's important in life, what makes you happy, and how do you overcome obstacles. So I thought that might be an interesting example for you. And another question was, and this is an interesting writing question, is on Not So Dead, I have 111 reader reviews. Unfortunately, it's 4.5 stars, which makes me happy. I didn't know. I write, I don't know if people are going to like it or not. So the question was, do I read my own reviews? And when I listened to, Donella did a great interview last month with, she'll remember the name. And she asked the question, do you read your reviews? And the author, who's terrific, said, no, I don't read my reviews. Well, I don't really believe her, but I read all my reviews. And I'm particularly interested if somebody was unhappy with something, because they might not be wrong. I'm learning all the time. Maybe they're going to tell me something that will help me. Steve, who you might see in the corner here, has no problem telling me when I screw up. And his feedback has been invaluable in correcting things. Not only that, but Steve catches things that like nobody catches. He'll say, in Not So Gone, there's a character named Layla who's a wonderful character. I love her. She got shot on the street by the bad guy, was taken to the hospital. And when I wrote it the first time, she was in critical condition. But then the next day, her boyfriend picks her up on a motorcycle and she takes off. And Steve said, wait a minute. She can't be in critical condition one day and then get on a motorcycle the next day. So there's an example of how stories change midstream. So yeah, I read my reviews, and it's fuel. The good ones particularly are fuel for when I get up in the morning and write the next day, if somebody has really enjoyed it and made a difference. You go into this, authors are very insecure, even the ones that are best-selling authors, because they don't know what the next book is going to be like. They do write clinkers. And so when one of the reasons people write and never publish is because they have a fear of when they put the book out there, what the heck are people going to think? So when I put that first book out there, I didn't know what they were going to think. And yeah, some of my friends and family bought and wrote a couple of nice reviews. But the first time that somebody I absolutely didn't know, who wasn't a friend and wasn't a relative, wrote a 5-star review and said it was the best book he had read in 66 years, I said, okay, now I'm an author. That's validation. So yeah, I read my reviews. I look for pats on the back just like anybody else would. So, here's another question. There's a bunch of good ones here. Well, let me take one of them at a time. I understand writing is your third career. How did you land up a writer? Okay. And yes, I spent 20 years in the retail business in New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut. I entered a family business that was a wonderful little business, and I helped grow it to 18 stores, and we sold it in 1995, just as the internet was starting to peak on the horizon. And I went to a conference, and that a light went off in my head. Wow, this is amazing. If we can sell things and communicate online, I just want to play in this world. And I started a consulting company in 1995 that is still running today, called Pathfinder Consulting Group. And we build websites for companies large and small. We've done work for everything from the UN to Hamilton Jewelers to the Harriet Carter catalog to SureFit slipcovers to the latest one is the Stone Center, which has stone yards up and down the East Coast. But writing was always in my head. And about 8-9 years ago, I had this idea. I started the book, Not So Dead. I got distracted for a year on a bunch of projects. And then after a year, I read what I'd written, which was about 50 pages. And I said, if it's any good, I'll continue. If I don't like it, I won't. And I read it and I said, yeah, I like this. I'm going to finish this and get it done and take the chance of putting myself out there. Another question was, did you ever consider writing under a pseudonym? And I think if I got bad reviews, I'd probably get a pseudonym because I wouldn't want to be associated with them. Yeah, I probably considered it after I put myself out there, but nobody has thrown a rock through my window yet, so I'll probably stick with Charles Levin for the time being. It's also very tough to establish your name as a kind of brand. Right now, you take James Patterson or Michael Connolly, who my wife and I both love, or Jeffrey Deaver. They're brands now. So when their books come out, people buy them right away. Well, that didn't happen on the first book they published. You have to establish a name. So starting over with a new name would be kind of a tough thing to do, I would think. Another question here. Do you think someone could be a writer if they don't feel emotion strongly? What does literary success look like to you? And do you write secrets into your books? Only a few people will find. Oh, I'll take the second question first because I think I like that one better. And the answer to that is yes. There's a term for these. They're called Easter eggs. Easter egg is like you hunt for it and you find it, it's colorful and fine. Well, there are a number of Easter eggs in my books that a lot of people don't get, but some of them do. So I'll give you an easy example, which is in Not So Gone, is a very important character that is from Mexico, and he speaks Spanish. So there are 45 Spanish phrases in Not So Gone. He has 45 lines in Spanish. About 35 of them I translate. The other 10 I don't. So either you get what he's saying from the context, but a few of them are really kind of inside jokes. So like Julie Seeley, who's a wonderful friend and fan here, she looks them up. So you can, if you're reading on a Kindle reader or something, you can highlight it and click it and it'll translate it for you. But there's some hidden jokes or gems in there. And in Not So Done that just came online, there's one really big Easter egg in there. And I'm not going to tell you what it is, but if you unlock the key to this particular one, it will really blow your mind. So yeah, I've always been a fan of puzzles. I do the little New York Times crossword every day. It sort of wakes my brain up. And I've always loved puzzles and mysteries. And so in my books, not all the mysteries get solved. There are some things that are left open-ended, and some are left to interpretation. And then, yeah, there's some little hidden gems in there that make it fun. And then the first one was about, can you write if you don't feel emotion strongly? Well, what do you think? I mean, how would you answer that question? Can anyone answer that? Pete, how would you answer that question? We were discussing this today. Can you, maybe I can unmute you and you can answer that question. How would you answer that question? I'm trying to unmute you. Can you unmute yourself? There you go.
Yeah, give me the question again. I was
The question was, do you think someone could be a writer if they don't feel emotions strongly?
I don't think so. Mainly because emotions are a motivator, and by being motivated, you have a desire to explain why you're motivated. It would seem to me. So I think I would answer in that regard.
And I think I'd agree with you too. I think the other thing that is helpful to me is life experiences. I mean, the more exposure you have not only to books and movies, but to hardship, tragedy, personal challenges. We have had many, many. Amy and I have been married for 48 years, and we've faced a number of them together. I think it gives more authenticity and
Life.
yeah, to your story. In fact, I have a writer friend who's about my age, a little bit past 20. He's a little older, and he had started writing late in his life like I did, and he says, "Oh, wouldn't it be? Oh, it's a shame that I didn't start doing this when I was in my 20s." And I said, "No, I think it's the perfect time because we've got a lot of stories. We've got a lot to talk about, and many of my little vignettes or stories mixed into the books come from real life experiences, not just, and then others are made up." And then I'll tell you one thing about the makeup part that some of you heard me say before, but I think it's really interesting. I do most of my writing in the morning. And I just find that for some reason, it's when I'm more motivated, my head's clearer. I've always been a morning person. But what I discovered when I started writing was, all of a sudden I came up with these characters, or stuff happens in the book, in the writing, and I'll be writing for a couple of hours, and then I'd say, well, where did that idea come from? And then I realized early on that in fiction, a lot of the great ideas you come up with and the emotions and the feeling come from your unconscious or subconscious, whatever you want to call it. They come from there. So I said, okay. And then I went to see a talk by Walter Mosley, who's a great writer and fantastic speaker. And he said, I do most of my writing in the morning because it's closer to my dreams. And I thought, that makes perfect sense, because when you wake up, you're still sort of a little bit in a dream state, and it's easier to access that unconscious or subconscious part of yourself. I also, with Steve and I've known each other a long time. We did a course at the University of Rochester together where we studied the complete works of Carl Jung. I mean, he and I bought the 26 volumes of Carl Jung. And so I am entrenched in the collective unconscious and what that means, and the archetypes and the well of things that underlie us. And I think that's when a story resonates with you as a reader, is when it's a personal experience that you've had, or it sounds like something that really happened. And what it is we all sort of share in this underlying aquifer that is the collective unconscious and the collective basket of experiences that we have. Last chat question. Would you leave us with an uplifting thought that you can share with us? And I would say, sure. One of the uplifting thoughts that I have is when you are really feeling overwhelmed or having difficulty, this is what I do. I walk outside, I look up at the sky, and if it's a clear night, I look at the moon, and I realize how insignificant my little problems are. And that 20 years from now, whatever it is that I'm ruminating over is going to not amount to a hill of beans. And so that's an uplifting thought that I would leave you with. Couple of things that I'll mention, and then if Donella wants to take more questions, if she wants to cut it off, that's fine. And that is, I just want to share my screen for a second and mention Um, give me a second. I did mention Not So Dead. I will mention that on my website, charleslevin.com, if I send out newsletters, a number of you are on them, but I send out free short stories and other things. If you would like to be on my newsletter, check out my website. Another thing is Julie and a couple of other people are here in a book club that I've talked to a couple of times. If you are interested in having me as a speaker at one of your book club meetings, you can just hit the sign up page on my website as well. And you can also, this is my website, and there's actually a very cool video on there about my books. And there's a sign up link up here. And Julie, you're probably going to like this if it comes up. There's a picture of Julie's book club. So, but you can sign up for my list here. And if you're interested in the book club, you can sign up there too. And my blog has short stories, and there's actually an excerpted chapter called Thought Experiment from the current book. And there is, I've added in a couple of these a video, an audio version. I'm a big believer in audiobooks. All three of my books are in audio. The third one, the audio will be out in a couple of weeks. I have a great narrator who's quite fantastic. And Danella, I don't know if you have a minute. I would love to play just a little clip. How are you on time?
Time, long as everyone has time.
All right.
Of course.
I'm going to go back to the blog. This is just one of my favorite chapters from the book. And I just posted an audio clip from it today. And if for some reason you can't hear it, let me know. But this gives you an idea of, this is a very different chapter from the book and goes to my whole discussion about what's important in life. And also you hear how great my Daniel Greenberg, the narrator, is. So I will play it for you. Just take a second for it to come up here. And shout out if for some reason you can't hear it, but I think Zoom will play this for you.
Chapter 43, Loverly.
Can you hear that?
I can.
Okay,
Yes.
All right, I'll play.
The gravel driveway is long and winding up to the Riverdale Assisted Living Center in Scarsdale. Rich gets out of his Crown Vic and takes a minute to take in the puffy morning clouds doing their slow dance in the early fall sky. The scent of freshly cut grass lingers in the air. Life is short and bittersweet, he thinks. Scarsdale is one of the most affluent towns in America. Not that it matters in this case. What matters is that it's close to where his sister, Margaret, lives, so she can check on Mom regularly. Rich feels pangs of guilt for visiting so infrequently, but being assigned with DHS to California and then DC has made it harder. Rich's mother, Alice, is in stage 5 of her Alzheimer's journey. Her trip down this path is mostly pleasant, but sometimes scary and confusing. She has good days and bad, according to Samantha, her nurse. There is no earthly light at the end of this road. Hopefully, there is a divine one. Rich checks in with Samantha. How is she today? Today is a good day. She may remember you. Why don't you see if she'll go outside? The morning is cool enough and the fresh air may do her some good. Rich takes Samantha's hand. Thank you for being so kind to her. It's not hard. She's a sweetheart. I miss the way she was, but I'm sure you hear that all the time. Getting older is about adapting, Alzheimer's or not. I understand. It's just a loss, that's all. Yes. And despite the series of losses we suffer from age, there's much left to appreciate and enjoy. Try focusing on that. Samantha gestures towards the hall. She's in her room. I will, Rich says. Samantha pivots and saunters towards the reception desk. Rich can't help noticing the gentle sway of her hips. He heads down the hall and knocks gently on the open door to Alice's room. His mother is in a rocking chair, attempting to knit something, which looks like a tangle of knots. She looks up. Rich, you're home from school. How was your day? Rich forces a smile. It was good, Mom. Would you like to go for a walk outside? It's an extra special day. She smiles broadly. Oh, you remembered what I always taught my students, that every day is an extra special day. She turns back to her chaotic knitting. He reaches over to lightly take her arm. She recoils. Don't touch me. You took advantage of me once. Shame on me. You won't do it again. Rich wonders what cruel memory she's reliving. It's me, Mom. Rich, your son. I saw they're serving ice cream outside. Would you like some? Her demeanor instantly changes. Ice cream? I love ice cream. Do you think they have chocolate sprinkles? I bet they do. Come, let's go see. She drops her knitting in a nearby garbage can. Let's go. I want vanilla with chocolate sprinkles. She stands, but still slightly stooped, heads for the door. Rich circles behind her as she heads out, retrieves the knitting, and puts it on her chair. He hears her from the hallway. Come on, what are you waiting for? He hurries into the hallway, gently guiding Alice downstairs and onto the expansive lawn. There is a good humor truck ringing its bell. Last call. Rich buys 2 ice cream cones, one with sprinkles, and hands it to his mother. They share a bench in a white gazebo on the edge of the woods. The cardinal alights on the railing and chirps a few notes. Rich, what was that song we used to sing when we did the dinner dishes at night? We sang lots of songs, Mom, mostly show tunes. And as if she is a blossom opening up to the sun and not failing at all, she launches into, all I want is a room somewhere far away from the cold night air, with one enormous chair. Oh, wouldn't it be lovely? And Rich joins in. Lots of chocolate for me to eat. Lots of coal making lots of heat. Warm face, warm hands, warm feet. Oh, wouldn't it be lovely? Then Alice stops abruptly and seems to shrink back into herself, like a tulip closing at the end of the day. What did you say your name was? Rich's eyes water. Rich, your son, Mom. Oh, Rich, yes. Did that bully pick on you again at school today? Yes, Mom. He did. Remember, bullies are just weaklings in disguise, trying to make up for their small penises. You stand up to him. Show him who's the better man. Rich blushes and smiles for real this time. I'm trying every day, Mom. Good, she says, as a tear runs down her cheek. Because today is an extra special day.
Wasn't he good?
Yeah, he's wonderful.
That was great.
Yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Yeah, the narrator surprised me by actually being able to sing in voice with the different voices. So it was really quite a delight to hear that.
It was very nice to hear it, because now when you go to read it, you'll hear those voices in your head, and it gave so much more feeling to the meaning of what you were saying. You know, the relationship between the son and the mother. It was very touching.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not the typical chapter in the book, because there's a lot of action and thriller stuff going on, but there are these moments which the people that have read it already really like those moments. And it goes to the question that we were discussing before with Pete. I think you have to have, an emotional interest. And the idea of in the book, Save the Cat, when here's the definition of a save the cat moment. When Rich retrieves his mother's knitting from the garbage can and puts it back on the chair, you're going to want to follow him anywhere, right? He becomes so likable. That's the save the cat moment for Rich, where he you can tell he's a good soul.
Any other questions? Oh, sorry. Just making sure everybody's on mute.
Yeah, any more questions or?
I'm just checking the chat. Eileen, anything? I just can't see you this time. At least it's different to see you. Can't see Eileen this time.
And Julie, since we've spoken and we're going to probably do another book club, maybe you could just share your thoughts, having read a couple of my books already.
Okay, can you hear me?
Sure.
Yes.
Okay. I was thinking of Save Schrodinger's cat. So one of the things I looked up from your novel is the whole Schrodinger's cat theory. A lot of things from your books come from like saying things like the CBS Sunday morning show or 60 Minutes, things like that. Like there's something about the seeds that you discuss. And we have one of our book club members, Kathleen Bonadonna, had answered a great question, and she knew the answer, and I kind of knew it. I had seen the Sunday morning episode, and I was like, oh yeah. So there's a lot of really interesting things, scientific things, and then you just mentioned emotional things that run through your books. And with the one with there's a child in the book, and there's a lot of emotion around that. I won't, no spoilers here, but definitely I see that you weave those through the emotion along with the science. So that's exciting. And one other thing I'd like to share is you mentioned earlier about how you put strong women into the books, and then you have an example in your learning with your mother, a strong one, and the female stockbroker in New Jersey, which is pretty cool. But I think might be noticing the truest females. We were definitely noticing there's a lot with women rising up to positions of power and also positions of influence, I think for the good of all. So I do love seeing the strong characters in your novels. So I encourage everyone to download an ebook or read or get, purchase the actual novel. And I'm looking forward. We'll do a book club, whether it's in person or Zoom, but Sherry Harris, a shout out to her. She's on this as well. So we'll get something going. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, Pete, yes.
Charlie, when we spent some time today discussing George Eliot, and one of the things we discussed was the drive she has for a moral quality. Are your moral qualities in the book obvious, or are these grow out of situations? Does anybody pronounce morality, or do we absorb the morality from the events and the way people act in the story?
That's a great question, Pete. I mean, morality comes into play a lot, and it really is all hooked to characters having to make tough decisions. The things that are in the gray area that aren't black and white, where there's going to be somebody's going to get hurt or there's some big risk being undertaken. and some of the characters make good decisions from a moral standpoint, and some of the characters make very bad decisions. And then there are good people who are in very difficult circumstances. There is a character both in Not So Gone and Not So Done, the latest one, Marcia Hume, who is a geneticist, and she has a lab in Waltham, Massachusetts. And it was a legitimate lab until our villain basically threatened her two daughters unless this geneticist produced what he wanted her to produce. And then in the latest novel, the villain is gone for the moment, and it's his sister who carries on the extortion and forces Marcia Hume to make some unfortunate decisions. So to me, morality is an abstract unless it's hooked to some real life situation where you have to decide to do the moral thing. And it's easy to do the moral thing when there's nothing at stake, but when there's something at stake and you have to go against maybe your own self-interest or risk damage of some kind to do the right thing, that to me is where the real rich kind of moral texture comes in a story.
Good, thank you.
Sure.
Anyone else? It's fine if you want to, you had a few minutes, if you want to go longer, it's not a problem. We're all home. There's time.
I'm very happy to talk as long as people are willing, or that's one thing that people wonder about, is that I get lots of emails from my readers and I answer every one of them. I just love interacting with my readers. And in fact, in my newsletter, the one that I had the most response to about 6 months ago was I sent out an email and the subject was, who wants to be murdered in my next book? I had 150 people volunteer to be murdered. And some of them wrote about, one woman said, yeah, if you're going to kill me, I mean, make it really good. And then I had a couple of readers say, I'd like to be in your book, but I don't want to be a victim. Life is too tough right now for me.
Charlie, I'm resending a question.
Okay. So I actually included several of the people that responded. I named characters after them, which goes back to the question of how do you name your characters? Well, some of the names I made up initially, but I read something recently where real people's names, people know when a name is a real name, like there is really a person out there in my book named Tiffany Sly. That's a real name. She has a big role in Not So Done, and she's one of my readers that I named the character after, which creates a lot of fun for my readers. She was so thrilled that I named it after her, but I couldn't help it. It's just such a cool name, Tiffany Sly. So she's Agent Tiffany Sly. And then there's a General Robert Morton, that's another one that's pretty good. And then I needed a couple of French names because there's a number of scenes that take place in Paris. So we have Denise de Rouen, who is also a reader and is making this as well.
We have one last question from someone else asked, do you know the ending when you start writing? I may have missed your answer. It's from Mickey.
I didn't answer that one, but it's a great question. I could give you a long or short answer. I'll give you the medium answer to this question. The question about, do you know the ending when you start? And the answer depends on the book. When I started writing Not So Dead, I had no outline. I had this premise about uploading personalities. I sat down in the morning and I just wrote, and I had no idea how it was going to end until I was about 2/3 of the way through the book. And by the way, subsequently, I learned that Lee Child writes this way. Does Jack read your novels? He sits down in the morning, he reads what he wrote yesterday, and he writes. And when he's done, he hands it to his editor. Now, I do a lot of revisions. He's got a team of people that do revisions. Then in my second novel, I thought, you know, it was pretty tricky just not knowing where things were going to go. I need a different way. I need to do an owl. I'm a pretty organized person. I need to be a little more organized. So I followed a recommendation of one of my author mentors, David Morrell. Almost anybody I talk to they don't know who David Morrell is, but they know who his iconic character is. Has anybody here heard of David Morrell? Probably not. His character is Rambo, who I know you've heard of, right? And he's a great writer. And what he does to start a book is he sits down and he writes himself a letter. Dear David, I have this idea for a story, and it goes blah, 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 like this, and this happens, and this character comes in, and blah, blah, blah. And 25 pages later, he has the letter. He reads the letter, decides, do I like what it is? Am I going to write the book or not? If I like it, I have an outline. So I thought, that's a really cool idea. I'm going to try that. So I started writing myself a letter, not Dear Charlie. I have this idea for a book. One of the key characters gets kidnapped, blah, 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 blah. But I'm about 11, 12 pages into the letter, and I get bored, and I say, no, I just got to write. So I start writing, and I didn't know the ending again until I was 2/3 of the way through. This last novel, I did a very detailed outline, which is what C.J. Box does. He writes a 100-page outline. I wrote a 73-page outline with a whole bunch of character definitions, and I have a board. I would haul it out with Post-it notes for every scene. I got to show you this because when people see it, it kind of blows their mind.
And Charlie, we're going to end this session in about 5 minutes, just so you know. We already have a couple people leaving this session.
Sure. So I did a very detailed outline, and in the hopes that I would be able to write the book faster because I would know the ending and everything in between, and I found it actually made it more difficult. So I'm back to not knowing the ending of the next book I am working on. And I'll do a little closing thing for you since I appreciate the heads up. But one of the things that I like, I'm sort of intrigued and interested in magic. So I have this envelope here, and I have 3 cards. And I'm going to ask you, let me pick a volunteer. Sherry, can you unmute yourself? I want you to pick a card. There's the Jack of Hearts, 3 of Clubs, Ace of Spades. Can you pick one?
You want me to say?
Yes, pick one.
Okay, 3 of Clubs.
Are you sure that that you want to make that choice?
Yeah, let's stick with it.
That's going to be your choice. Well,
That's it.
this was the envelope that I took the cards out of, and you will pick the 3. And the lesson, or the story that goes with that magic trick is, a writer writes a story, but every reader brings their own experiences and feelings and emotions and understanding to that story, right? So readers all experience it in a different way, whether it's the Jack of Hearts or the 3 of Clubs or the Ace of Spades. But as the author, my job is to always guess what you're going to pick and be right. So on that, I'll say, Danella, thank you, and thank you all for coming. And those of you who are going to read the books, please enjoy them. Feel free to email me. My email is charlie@charleslevin.com. That's LIE. You also can email me on the website. There's a contact us on the charleslevin.com website. If you have a book club, happy to talk to you. And if you subscribe to my newsletter, I will be giving out a few free audiobooks at the end of the month. And you may want to put your name in the hat for that and hear more of Daniel Greenberg. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. And Charlie, we'd love to have you back at the library once we're open.
Yeah, we
Happy
talked
to come
about
in.
doing it. I had recently